Shadows over the Orinoco. Trump's Venezuela gambit and the looming shadow of Sino-Russian intervention. A hemisphere on the brink. In the sweltering heat of October 2025, the Western Hemisphere teeters on the edge of a geopolitical abyss. Donald Trump's second presidency, inaugurated amid vows of America First revival, has transformed Venezuela from a distant humanitarian tragedy into a flashpoint of imperial ambition and proxy confrontation. What began as a campaign promise to liberate Venezuela's vast oil reserves has metastasized into a cascade of naval interdictions, diplomatic ruptures, and thinly veiled threats of invasion. The termination of temporary protected status, TPS, for over 300,000 Venezuelan migrants, U.S. strikes on suspected drug vessels, and Nicolas Maduro's explosive claims of a foiled, false flag, embassy bombing have ignited fears of open conflict. Yet, beneath this bilateral showdown lies a more ominous undercurrent, the specter of great power entanglement. Russia and China, Venezuela's steadfast patrons, stand poised to intervene, not merely as enablers of Maduro's regime, but as architects of a multipolar counterstroke against U.S. hegemony. This essay dissects Trump's multifaceted objectives in Venezuela, chronicles the escalating crisis through recent events, forecasts potential trajectories, and rigorously examines the profound risks of Sino-Russian involvement. In doing so, it argues that while Trump's strategy may yield short-term tactical gains, it courts a hemispheric quagmire where Moscow and Beijing could transform a regional spat into a global conflagration. Trump's core objectives: petro-imperialism in the guise of security. At the heart of Trump's Venezuela policy lies an unapologetic fusion of economic predation and ideological crusade. During his 2024 campaign, Trump candidly articulated a vision of engineering Venezuela's collapse to seize its hydrocarbon bounty, the world's largest proven reserves, exceeding 300 billion barrels, predominantly in the Orinoco belt. This echoes his first-term, maximum pressure doctrine, which imposed crippling sanctions and recognized opposition figure Juan Guaido as interim president. Yet, in 2025, the approach has sharpened into a blade honed by domestic imperatives, stabilizing U.S. energy prices amid drill, baby, drill rhetoric, curbing inflation from Middle Eastern volatility, and offsetting OPEC plus dominance. Economically, the calculus is stark. Maduro's socialist pivot has rerouted Venezuelan crude toward China, 15% of Beijing's imports, and Russia, eroding Washington's leverage in global energy markets. A compliant post-Maduro regime would fling open the Orinoco to American majors like Chevron, whose Biden-era licenses teeter on renewal. This would not only flood U.S. refineries with discounted heavy oil but also blunt adversaries' resource leverage. Geopolitically, the drug cartel narrative, framed as a war on narcos, serves as a convenient casus belli. August 2025's secret Pentagon directive authorizing strikes on Latin American cartels explicitly targets Venezuelan operations, ostensibly to dismantle Maduro's military funding but covertly to erode his asymmetric defenses. 8.2 million strong militias, drone swarms, and coastal fortifications. Migration amplifies the pressure points. Trump's September rally diatribe demanding Venezuela repatriate prisoners and mental patients underscores a zero-tolerance border strategy. The Supreme Court's October 3 upholding of TPS termination for 300,000-plus Venezuelans, despite the country's 75% GDP contraction since 2013, exacerbates this, funneling deportees northward and straining hemispheric allies like Colombia. Critics, from Venezuelan exiles to progressive think tanks, decry this as neo-Monroeism, a revival of the 1823 doctrine positing the Americas as Washington's exclusive sphere, free of foreign adversaries. Indeed, Trump's fixation on Maduro's Russia-China ties betrays imperial anxiety. Venezuela's $60 billion in loans and oil prepays from Moscow and Beijing since 2014 represent not just lifeline aid but a foothold in the U.S. backyard. This strategy, unencumbered by Biden's multilateral hesitancy, prioritizes audacious wins, asset seizures, opposition unification under U.S. patronage, and a privatized energy sector. but it flirts with catastrophe. Sanctions have already isolated Venezuela, slashing GDP and spawning a 7.9 million person humanitarian exodus. Escalation risks a Vietnam-esque quagmire, with U.S. costs ballooning to $50 minus $100 billion annually. Trump's October 6 halt of all diplomatic outreach, ordering envoy Richard Grenell to cease talks, signals this brinkmanship's zenith, pivoting from negotiation to coercion. The October flashpoint, from strikes to false flags. The past week's events crystallized this volatility. On October 5, Trump announced a U.S. strike on a vessel off Venezuela's coast, the fourth in weeks, claiming it carried illicit drugs and killing an undisclosed number aboard. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's assurance of full authorization for Caribbean operations hints at land-based follow-ups, targeting cartel labs and leaders inside Venezuelan territory. Maduro's riposte was swift. Branding the attacks acts of war, he threatened a state of emergency and mobilized defenses. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's full support in a call with counterpart Ivan Gil underscores the proxy dimensions, with Moscow warning of regional escalation. Compounding this, Maduro's October 7 revelation of a thwarted, false flag bombing at the U.S. Embassy in Caracas, allegedly orchestrated by extremist right-wing sectors to justify intervention, has polarized discourse. National Assembly President Jorge Rodriguez claimed the plot was relayed to Washington via European channels, vowing swift perpetrator identification. U.S. sources, per NBC, dismiss it as regime theater, yet it echoes historical pretexts like the Gulf of Tonkin. On X, pro-Maduro voices amplify the narrative as evidence of Yankee perfidy, while opposition accounts like at Ibepacheco label it deflection from internal woes. The TPS ruling amplifies human costs. Effective immediately, it dooms hundreds of thousands to deportation amid Venezuela's multidimensional poverty, 20 million affected, per Human Rights Watch's October update. Detentions of foreign aid workers, including Colombians like Manuel Alejandro Tique, as hostages in Caracas prisons evoke Orwellian isolation tactics. The UN's renewed fact-finding mission on abuses, coupled with arbitrary arrests and site blocks, Wikipedia, paints a regime cornered yet defiant. These flashpoints are no anomalies, they operationalize Trump's playbook. Naval interdictions disrupt Maduro's narco revenue, estimated at $3-5 billion annually, while embassy intrigue sows domestic U.S. support for escalation. Back-channel talks via Qatar and Brazil have crumbled, with Maduro's cosmetic cartel concessions rebuffed. As Grenell's withdrawal attests, the die is cast, confrontation over compromise. Forecasting the maelstrom, scenarios of escalation. Projecting forward to Q4 2025 mid-2026 demands navigating U.S. midterm politics, Venezuelan grit, and global wildcards. Expert consensus pegs a 30 to 40% chance of limited military conflict by November, with trajectories bifurcating into high escalation, diplomatic stasis, or improbable thaw. In the high escalation path, 35% likelihood, failed interdictions provoke retaliation, perhaps a genuine embassy incident or border incursion, prompting Trump to greenlight drone missile barrages on Venezuelan soil. Casualties mount, militias clash, and Maduro invokes armed conflict, halting oil flows and swelling the refugee tide. A U.S. naval blockade ensues by early 2026, evoking Cuba 1962 but with asymmetric twists. Iranian-supplied drones harrying carriers, cyber blackouts from Russian hackers. Trump's midterm optics thrive on toughness, but quagmire cost spiral. The baseline diplomatic standoff, 50%, sees congressional war powers checks are OPEC plus gluts tempering aggression. Sporadic talks resume, deportations surge, 100,000 plus Venezuelans, and Maduro hunkers down with Sino-Russian succor. No regime topple, but humanitarian, oil carve-outs for Chevron emerge, perpetuating a frozen limbo into mid-2026, alleviated only if Maduro's exit yields sanctions relief. De-escalation, 15%, hinges on mediation miracles or Trump's China pivot. Partial TPS revival and joint anti-cartel ops could fracture Maduro's coalition, paving opposition polls by early 2026, especially if recession mandates energy détente. Relations harden into Cold War contours. U.S. patrols in the Caribbean, Venezuelan border fortifications. Trump's triumph, Maduro's ouster via coup, avoids full boots on ground, failure invites endless bleed. Foreign Minister Gill's September no-conflict pledge masks hybrid prep, tilting toward attrition. The Sino-Russian pivot, from patronage to proxy powerhouse. No analysis of Venezuela's vortex is complete without foregrounding Russia and China's interventionist potential, a thread woven through every escalation, yet underappreciated in Western discourse. Since 2014, their $60+ billion infusion, loans, oil prepays, arms, hasn't just propped Maduro, it's embedded strategic depth, challenging U.S. unipolarity. Stressing this possibility isn't alarmism, it's realism, given historical precedents, Syria for Russia, Africa for China, and current alignments. China's calculus, economic fortress, strategic restraint. Beijing's $19 billion stake secures discounted crude, insulating against U.S. sanctions and Taiwan contingencies. Xi Jinping's May 2025 firm support pledge, bolstered by August's $10 billion refinery pact, signals unwavering backing, UN vetoes, anti-sanction broadsides, fresh loans. Yet, military adventurism lags at 10% probability. Overseas bases in the Americas invite encirclement, diverting from South China Sea priorities. Non-kinetic tools dominate, cyber ops crippling U.S. grids, secondary sanctions on American firms, or BRICS expansion via Venezuelan proxies. In high escalation, China could flood markets with Venezuelan oil stockpiles, weaponizing petrodollars and spiking U.S. inflation. Defaults have soured ties, but Venezuela's BRICS flirtation offers Beijing a hemispheric hedge. Imagine joint naval drills in the Caribbean, echoing Djibouti. Russia's reach. Wagner's echoes, Putin's gambit. Moscow's assertiveness outstrips Beijing's, with a 50% escalation aid likelihood. The May 2025 Strategic Pact, S-300 batteries, Sukhoi jets, joint maneuvers, positions Venezuela as an anti-NATO redoubt, mirroring Syria's 2015 playbook. Ukraine's drain limits scale, but volunteers, Wagner remnants, could embed for cartel hunts or militia training, amplifying hybrid warfare. Disinformation floods, GPS jamming, hypersonic feints. Lavrov's October call exemplifies this. Rhetorical shields escalating to materiel surges. Full boots on ground risks NATO riposte, but oil barter sustains Maduro, while Arctic Venezuela pipelines tease long-game energy subversion. There, no limits, Axis synergizes perilously. In tandem, they deter invasion by inflating costs, petro-UN threats eroding dollar hegemony, joint vetoes paralyzing UN action. High escalation could spawn a Caracas consensus, Russian mercenaries securing oil fields, Chinese firms rebuilding under protection, birthing a Sino-Russian enclave. Historical analogues abound. Angola's Cold War proxies, Libya's post-Gaddafi carve-up. Sentiment underscores this. Pro-regime posts hail Villagano as anti-imperial triumph, while analysts warn of World War II light. Neither seeks Armageddon over Caracas, but miscalculation, say, a U.S. strike hitting Russian advisors, could cascade, drawing in Cuba's Spetsnaz or Iran's IRGC. The probability? 40 to 60% for indirect bolstering, 20% for direct clash, enough to make Monroe's ghost recoil. Collateral ripples. Colombia as fault line, the region in flux. No hemispheric domino falls in isolation. Colombia, Venezuela's linchpin neighbor and U.S. ally, absorbs the shockwaves acutely. Hosting 2.8 to 3 million refugees, Bogota's $1.5 billion annual burden swells with TPS fallout, channeling deportees southward and straining its 10-year protection scheme, 1.7 million covered. Conflict could displace 1 to 2 million more by mid-2026, igniting urban tinderboxes like Bogota's slums. Security spills over. Washington's September decertification tying Colombian anti-drug lapses to Venezuelan cartels slashes aid, inviting sanctions. August's Venezuelan troop deployments spark ELN empowerment, torpedoing Petro's total peace. Economically, $1 billion bilateral trade phrase, refugee labor depresses wages, and GDP growth dips to 2.5%. Petro's August anti-intervention rallies, juxtaposed with July's binational zone, betray sovereignty jitters, cooling U.S. ties. Atlantic Council pleas for joint patrols falter against Trump's unilateralism, risking Bogota's BRICS tilt for leverage. Regionally, echoes reverberate. Brazil's Lula mediates warily, fearing Amazon spillovers. Mexico's AMLO decries Yankee bullying. A Sino-Russian Venezuela fortifies anti-US arcs, from Nicaragua to Guyana's Essequibo dispute. Conclusion: imperial echoes and the multipolar reckoning. Trump's Venezuela odyssey, oil heist masked as moral crusade, revives 19th-century gunboat diplomacy in 21st-century drag. Recent strikes, TPS evisceration, and embassy intrigue propel a narrative of inexorable clash, yet forecasts reveal contingency's fragility. Amid this, Russia and China's involvement looms not as footnote but fulcrum. Their economic sinews and military sinews could transmute bilateral ire into tripartite Armageddon, enforcing a post-unipolar order where the Americas are no longer Washington's pond. The irony bites. Trump's "America First" may birth everyone but isolation, as Moscow's Spetsnaz and Beijing's Yuan entrench a redoubt. Policymakers must pivot, from coercion to concert, lest October's embers ignite a conflagration. Venezuela's sands, oil-soaked and bloodied, whisper a timeless caution: empires overreach at their peril. In stressing Sino-Russian shadows, this essay urges not fatalism, but foresight, for in the Orinoco's depths, the next world war may yet be drilled.